Okay, we are back, guys. Hopefully somebody is watching. Hopefully you know we're back. Give it a few minutes and everybody's going to be back, hopefully. Let people know in the other stream to come over here if the chat over there is still running. And yeah, the camera's doing it again. I thought I solved the problem, but I haven't solved the problem. Okay. Screen's still tearing, but might not be fixable in a reasonable time frame. Looks like it's not. Something about the equipment on the road was working the other day, so who knows? Maybe it's bandwidth. I don't think it's bandwidth. I think this is it. All right, let's get going. I want to tell you about my talk at University of Utah yesterday. It was the Federalist Society, so it was at the law school. It was on free speech and Western civilization. That title created quite a stir in the universe on the campus. Not only is free speech questionable these days, but it turns out the Western civilization is not a concept people like or people support. It's a little, I don't know, West-centric or something. In a multicultural world, it's not acceptable. Anyway, so we got a good turnout for FedSoc. It was one of the largest FedSoc events I've done. Utah Law School is a relatively small law school as compared, let's say, to Harvard or something like that. And we got like 70 students, which was fantastic. And most of them were not Federalist Society students. So they were students from the law school, but from outside the Federalist Society. Many of them leftists. And as a consequence, there was a really good mix of questions, really challenging, real positive back and forth. It was videotaped, but I think really, really poorly, unfortunately. When I rely on other people to do this, it kind of works out. It doesn't really work out usually. But they said they would videotape it. They said it would have high quality. Anyway, we'll get some videotape. We'll get audio. We'll see if it's any good and if it's worth publishing. But the Q&A was particularly excellent. Lots of challenging questions. Lots of attempt to insult me or to catch me or to get me at a contradiction or to put me into a corner or you know, what they were really, a lot of them were trying to do is pigeonhole me, right? You know, is he a conservative? Is he a liberal? They couldn't figure out what I was. They couldn't figure out where to pigeonhole me. So that was a lot of fun, and hopefully that'll be out at some point, and you'll be able to enjoy that and benefit from it. But so that was a good event. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you for putting it together, and yeah, really good event. And then today, leadership program with the Rockies, which is always really good, and was fantastic. Talked about capitalism, and I'll be doing that again. I'll be coming back to Denver for the leadership program with the Rockies in January. I do 2 of these talks a year for the program. One is on what is capitalism, and does capitalism produce good results? And the second is the morality of capitalism. So I did the practical side. On January, I'll do the morality of capitalism. All right, let's see. All right, so let's talk about World War III. What a topic, right? But I think it was good clickbait. But more importantly, it's a topic everybody seems to be talking about. There's a lot of discussion out there about World War III. It is, I think, in the minds of many, many people, a real possibility. I think people are looking around the world and they're seeing a war in Europe, a major war in Europe, a major war between 2 very, well-armed military forces on the continent of Europe. I don't think anybody expected to see that. They see a war now in Israel, and everybody is looking with a lot of caution and a lot of angst towards China, and to see what's going to happen with China and Taiwan. So I think that's one reason why there's a lot of angst, there's a lot of worry. When the world sees Russia and China aligned with one another, and the 2 of them aligned with Iran, and Iran being behind Hamas and the Palestinians. That I think is a source of significant worry. If you add in North Korea is aligned with Russia. It's providing weapons and ammunition to the Russians. And in a sense, if each one of those is a separate conflict, if each one of those is a fragment, then it's no big deal. Then there's a conflict in Ukraine, and there's a conflict in Gaza, and there's a conflict maybe in China, Taiwan. And each one of those can be dealt with independently, and it's probably not that big of a deal, although Taiwan would be. The challenge becomes is if you start seeing them as a pattern. And if you start seeing it as the Russia, China, Iran bloc as a bloc that is challenging the United States and the West. And once you see that, then there's reason to worry. There's reason to be concerned. Add to that the fact that there's a lot of talk out there in the world about the global South, about BRICS, the kind of BRICS being Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, as being an alternative to the West, about an alternative currency, new currency to replace the dollar. So there is this real potential of more and more real, sustainable angst, and people really worried, and seeing this not in terms of independent, unrelated conflicts, but as part of now a real, not yet world war, but a real global challenge. The global South plus China, Russia, Iran really facing off against the United States and the West. And then if China invades Taiwan, does that become a real world war? Does it become a real world war even if China does not face off in Taiwan? If China just continues to support Russia, and if it's willing to support Iran and willing to support Hamas in the Middle East, what does that look like? And to what extent does that evolve into a world war? So it does, I mean, there is a realignment, a global geopolitical realignment going on right now that I don't think most of us really saw coming. I don't think almost anybody, well, there's some exceptions, but I don't think very many people expected a war in Ukraine. I don't think many people expected China to move towards authoritarianism as quickly as it has, to reject kind of the liberal, the trend towards liberalization as quickly as it did. And then I don't think people expected China and Russia then to align somehow with Iran. I mean, both China and Russia have an Islamism problem. Both China and Russia are threatened by Islam. China has the Uyghur problem in Western China, which they are dealing with concentration camps and with collective punishments on a massive scale. China has had Islamist problems. They certainly had it in Chechnya. If you remember the 2 Chechen wars, talk about killing innocents and flattening cities. What Israel is doing in Gaza is like kids' play as compared to what Russia did in Chechnya. Nobody said anything at that time. It is interesting. And this is, just as an aside here, people wonder why everybody jumps from criticizing Israel to anti-Semitism. And I think the main reason a lot of us jump from people attacking Israel to a broader idea that this is motivated by anti-Semitism is the fact that Israel is not doing anything that other countries have not done. Israel is not doing anything that a lot of other countries have not done. It's not happening right now as we speak in a lot of other parts of the world, Sudan, where the Islamists are slaughtering men, women, and children, where there's a brutal civil war. Russia in Chechnya war, Yemen right now, where the Houthis and the civil war in Yemen, where civilians, hundreds of thousands of civilians are casualties of that war. Not a peep out of the world. Not a comment. Nothing. Israel is defending itself, clearly defending itself, clearly responding to aggression, clearly responding to an enemy committed to its own destruction, and the whole world goes apoplectic, and every story now has ceasefire somewhere in it. Oh, well, there's this happening, and what about the ceasefire? And this happening, but what about a ceasefire? As if Israel has some moral responsibility to do a ceasefire. Why? Because, civilians are dying in Gaza? Why didn't Hamas think of that? Aren't they the responsibility of Hamas? Anyway, we've talked about all that. So you've got a situation where Russia and China are aligned with an Islamist regime, which they shouldn't really be aligned with because it's not their friend, it is indeed their enemy, and they know it's their enemy, and they've taken action against Islamists in their own countries. But it is an alliance of convenience. It's an alliance of convenience focused on one thing and one thing primarily, and that is to be anti-US. So is this the precursor for a world war? Are we heading towards a major conflict between Russia, China, Iran, and the global South? I don't know what the global South is. Is that Brazil, Argentina? Is it all of South America? Does it include much of Southeast Asia? Does the global South include, is India part of this because they're part of BRICS? Does it include Indonesia, Malaysia? Does it include South Africa? Does it include the rest of Africa? Nobody really says. They talk about a global South as if it's some kind of, one thing, one block. And of course it's not. Are there countries in that block who would like to join Russia and China in attacking the West and in the US? Maybe. Not clear. Who? So there's a lot of hand waving when people talk about the global South and people talk about this idea, this potential, of World War III. So it's not clear who the combatants are. You can see Russia and China, you can see Iran as clearly being hostile to the United States and to Europe. But what does a World War III mean? A World War III would mean, Russia and China being willing to engage militarily against the United States and Europe, NATO, maybe against Japan, South Korea, Australia, kind of a Western, if you will, alliance. Does that seem feasible? Does it seem that that's where they're heading? Now, I think there are at least two parties that you could imagine would be interested in would be at least be flirting with that as a kind of an interesting idea. One is Putin, who I think is megalomaniac and really embraces conflict with the West and believes in some kind of Russian destiny to achieve. But the thing about Russia is that in such an alliance with China and with Iran, Russia is clearly a junior partner to Russia is clearly a junior partner to China. Does Putin really embrace a role as a junior partner? Does Putin really want a conflict with NATO? He's having a hard enough time with Ukraine. Ukraine is undermanned, under-equipped. It still has mostly second-tier weapon systems from the West. Russia's not fighting against F-35. It's not fighting against, the full military force that a NATO could put together, that the United States could put together, and it's not doing well. Argue about how badly it is doing, but clearly it's not doing well. Does Russia really want to expand that conflict to armies that I think it is quite reasonable and obvious would completely annihilate it and destroy it? Well, certainly not alone, but would it be willing to do it together with China? And that puts into question, well, what does China want? Does China really want a war right now? A significant war, a big war with the West? Does it want to risk losing? It's on this path that, at least until a few years ago, seemed to be leading it towards riches, towards success, towards power. Does it really want to jeopardize whatever path it's on for the sake of a war now? Risk losing? It probably would lose. Do either one of those, Russia or China, want to risk nuclear war and annihilation? Doesn't strike me that China or Russia are suicidal, that the leadership is suicidal. China has ambitions that I think more realistic and are more substantive than Russian ambitions. But those ambitions first have to be achieved on the economic wealth front inside China before China can be dominant internationally and can take on the United States militarily. And it's no question China knows this. They're not delusional. They're not as crazy as I think Putin is. So what is the incentive China has to go to war with the United States? I think the only incentive they would have, and the only circumstances, I think there are probably two circumstances that they would do it. One is if they thought they could win. I mean, they thought they could win decisively, that the odds were clearly in their favor. And I think that's unequivocally just not the case. They would cause a lot of damage to the United States, even in a conventional war. But their chances of winning are below 50%. I mean, the chances of taking Taiwan are not that great. And Taiwan's a tiny little island with a small military, but partially because America and Japan and South Korea might come to Taiwan's defense, but also just Taiwan has a strong military and amphibious landing and all of that and the terrain, and not easy. None of that is easy. So China's not going to engage in a war that it is likely to lose. It'll wait. And I think the Chinese believe, I think falsely, but they believe that they will get back on track for economic growth. They will back on track to economic wealth. They will grow, they will achieve, they will succeed. They will become the richest country in the world. They'll invest heavily in the military. And then they will take over the world. Then, well, maybe not take over the world, but take on the United States and take Taiwan. I also don't think China has ambitions, let's say, to occupy the United States. In the same way that I do think Russia has ambitions to occupy Europe. I do think Russia has ambitions in its fantasy world to basically control all of Western Europe. I don't think China has those ambitions. Its philosophy doesn't drive it. It wants to be the respected dominant player in the world. It doesn't necessarily want to rule the entire world. So I just don't see China's motivation to launch into World War III. The other reason they might do it, one I said, is if they thought they could win. I mean, thought confidently they could win. The second is, if things were so bad in China that the only way for Xi to survive somehow is to launch a war. But I don't see that. I mean, Xi has complete control of what's going on in China. There's no real opposition to him. And I think a war would completely destabilize his rule. There's no reason to believe that a war would actually solidify his control over China. Quite to the contrary. So it is, as I said, I am skeptical about China's incentives. Iran is different, but Iran here, it has to be clear, is the junior partner. Iran has no economy to speak of. It has oil exports, but the oil export terminals could be taken out basically in a day by an air attack by Israel or the United States. Iran has global ambitions. Iran wants the domination of Islam over the world. Iran, in some mystical, unattached from reality sense, believes that that is possible. Iran wouldn't mind nuclear war because it is a suicidal, death-worshipping ideology that many of the people who control Iran have. They share that with Hamas. But Iran has no military force. It has no real military standing. It poses no military threat to the West. Israel, the United States, Western Europe, NATO could annihilate the Iranian military and the Iranian regime in a matter of hours if they chose to do so. There's just no military threat that Iran poses to the West. It only poses a military threat to the West because the West won't do anything, right? I mean, American bases in Syria and Iraq are being, attacked almost every hour, maybe twice an hour. And the US is doing nothing, zero, zilch. That makes Iran seem incredibly powerful, but they are not. So we have three countries that want to create mayhem in the world. They don't share interests. Russia has its eye on its empire in Europe. China has an eye on being a dominant economic and ultimately military power. Iran wants to control the world through Islam. They don't share much in common, except a hatred of the West, a hatred of Israel, which is surprising coming from China, but I guess not so much. A hatred of the West, a hatred of Israel, but no positive framework, no, communism, global communism. We're going to instill communism all over the world. No global vision for, the Aryan race and space for the Aryan race. Again, Russia wants Europe and it wants to expand its territory, but it's not some global ideology driving it. There's just no basis to take this to World War III. There's just no there. A, they would lose, and they would lose pretty quickly, depending on how it developed. But B, there's no incentive. The main party at such a war would have to be China. China is the only country in the world today that could field a military that could challenge, if at all, the United States and its allies. So without China, nothing goes. Russia's not going to cede leadership of World War III to China. China has no interest in going to war so that Russia can take Europe, so that it's a distraction. And there are territorial disputes between China and Russia. Who gets to rule Asia? There's massive competition between China and Russia over who gets to influence Central Asia, the stans, the various countries that are stans. There's just basically no rational basis, or for that matter, any basis. There's never a rational basis for war. There's just no basis for these countries to launch World War III against the United States and Europe. Now, we could get there by accident, I guess. That would have to involve China invading Taiwan and then Russia expressing sympathy with the Chinese and somehow United States getting enmeshed in defending Taiwan and not being successful, and the Iranians using that opportunity to create foment in the Middle East. So you can imagine as something descending into a kind of World War III scenario where there's fighting going on in Asia and Europe and in the Middle East, all kind of guided by the same alliance. But even there, a war in the Middle East cannot be sustained if Iran is really at war with the United States and the United States takes out the Iranians. War in the Middle East would end pretty quickly. Israel can defend itself for the most part, and whatever resources the United States has in the Middle East could be deployed to Asia or to Europe or whatever's needed. Again, if NATO got into this war, the Ukrainian war would be over a long, long time ago. So and then what do? Do you take Moscow, or do you fear nuclear war, so you just hold them at the border? I just don't see it, how the pieces come together. Now, I'm not saying there will never be a World War III, because The real impetus for World War III is not China, Russia, Iran. The real impetus for World War III is not the strength of our enemies. It's not the strength of those countries. It's not some alternative competing ideology. There is none. It's not like Russia has an ideology other than Russia. That's the ideology. It's not like China has an ideology. Their ideology is not communism. It's not exactly anything. It's Chinese philosophy applied to China. It's control. It's the Chinese Communist Party, which is badly named because they're not communist, controlling China. But there's no, like the Soviet Union had this notion of global, just like a global jihad, a global communism. China has no ambitions for global communism. Iran has ambitions for global jihad, but Iran is an insignificant player. So it's not the strength of their ideology that would lead to World War III. What could lead to World War III? The weakness of the West. The capitulation of the West. The lack of any kind of ideology and any kind of belief in any kind of self-esteem in the West. It is the West's collapse that could lead to a World War III. If the West descends into chaos, if the West descends into, if it starts shrinking economically, if it goes into real stagnation or worse, real depression, if the United States cannot keep up its military, if its military starts decaying because we don't have the funds anymore because our government is bankrupt to actually keep up maintaining our ships, maintaining our tanks, maintaining our airplanes, if NATO starts splintering and fighting within each other, if Israel doesn't have the courage or the determination to finish the job in places like Gaza and ultimately in Iran, if the United States just leaves the Middle East with its tail between its legs and never takes care of the enemy, that kind of weakness, which we are already exhibiting, which is already part of the West, but not, that could lead to war. That could lead to somebody, Russia, China, Islam, taking advantage and trying to test, poking the West, poking the United States, instigating wars. And ultimately that could develop into a world war. But it won't happen as long as the West is strong. And the West is not because of any particular virtues right now, but the West is strong because of a history. The West is strong because we still have the best military force in the world, and we're very rich. We're very rich because of our past. Not so much because of our present, but because of our past. As we become poorer, I think China, Russia, Iran become poorer as well. But as the West becomes poorer, and if that poverty accelerates, if that really speeds up and becomes a real force, yeah, people will want to take advantage of that. People will start chipping away. People will start poking at us, and people will be willing to risk a world war in circumstances like that. So I have to admit that in the world in which we live right now, over the next 10 years, let's say, 15 years, I do not believe we will face a World War III. We're going to face a lot of challenges. I still don't know how Ukraine is going to end because I don't know that the West has the resilience to continue to support the Ukrainians in their fight against Russia. I have no doubt the Ukrainians can win if they get the kind of support they need from the West. And they need to win. They have to win in order to make clear to the Russians how weak they are and how united and strong the West potentially is. That is what to keep the barbarians at bay. What keeps the barbarians at bay is our strength. Our weakness will only encourage them. I don't know exactly how things are going to work out in Gaza. I fear that Israel, again, will not do everything that needs to be done. It's doing more than it's ever done before, arguably. And it isn't finished yet. But will it go all the way? Will it do what is necessary? Will it destroy Hamas? And more than that, will it destroy the will of the Palestinian people to continue to fight Israel? Because Hamas is not the problem. I know this is politically incorrect to say, but Hamas is not the problem. The problem is the Palestinian people. The problem is that overwhelming majority of the Palestinian people want to continue a war with Israel. We have to worry about Taiwan and China. And China will continue to test us and test the Taiwanese. China will continue to do that. But again, I think the likelihood that China becomes much, much stronger than it is today is small, because China is facing massive economic problems that are not going to be solved easily and are only going to get worse. China is not going to become as rich as it believes it is. And I think that if we continue to supply weapons to Taiwan, Taiwan will only become stronger and only become a more substantial enemy, a substantial challenge for the Chinese. You have to keep an eye on China, you have to keep an eye on Taiwan. I don't worry about Taiwan. I worry about Israel, but I don't worry about its survival. Israel is strong. Israel is not going to do everything it needs to do to crush the Palestinian people's will to fight it. But what Israel can do is it can kick the can down the road, and all Israel is doing now is what Israel will do is to guarantee that war will continue, but it not represents the end of Israel any more than the disgusting, horrible retreat of the United States from Afghanistan guaranteed the end of the United States. No, it was another sign of weakness, perpetuation of a war with Islamism. But when Israel's U.S. is just not going to disappear. So I have to admit, I'm not worried about World War III. I'm not worried about external threats. I worry about internal threats. I worry about the disappearance of freedom in the United States. I worry about the decline of economic liberty in this country, of personal liberty in this country. I worry about the state growing and growing and growing in power, no matter who is in the White House or who runs Congress. I worry about the tribalism in this country, about the hatred that dominates our political discourse. I worry about the fact that our politicians cannot get anything done, and a lot needs to be done in order to dismantle the power of the American state. I worry about Donald Trump getting reelected and moving us another few steps towards authoritarianism and a complete breakdown of the American system of government. So the United States is where the problems are. I worry about the fact that Europe, because of the European Union, because of the regulatory state that is the European Union, is not growing economically, sees no real innovation. Entrepreneurship is in decline. And at some point, Europe would start turning against itself. At some point, when there's no economic growth, Europeans will start thinking of it as a zero-sum game. The Germans will start resenting the Italians, who resent somebody else, and you'll get strife within Europe. So, the real challenge we face is not a World War III. The real challenge we face is the weakness of our own countries. It's the lack of any kind of unifying philosophy. It's the lack of any kind of ideals. It's the lack of any kind of values. It's the lack of any principles, and it's a lack of a focus on freedom. And right now, it's hard to be optimistic about the direction the United States is heading. I mean, in spite of the horror of a first Trump presidency, we're going to get a second one, maybe. And if not, we'll get a horror of a second Biden presidency. I mean, talk about horrors of horrors. I don't think we're going to get a civil war. I fear much more that we ultimately attract a charismatic authoritarian leader. But even if that doesn't happen, what I do see just is slow decline. What I do see is the country struggling to pay its bills. By the way, the government will probably be shut down a week from now. Not because anybody wants to shrink government significantly, but because Republicans just don't have a clue what they're doing. I worry that the Western world is going to fragment, disintegrate, turn against each other, be weakened and destroyed from within. Europe has a massive Muslim problem that it's going to struggle with and is going to have to deal with for decades to come, and is not equipped to deal with it. It doesn't know what to do. The United States has a leftist problem, but it also has a right-wing problem. It has an incompetence problem. It has a tribalist problem. It has, and of course, all of this leads to economic stagnation, no development, no growth, no innovation, and that ultimately would lead to military weakness, and that could lead to a World War III in 10, 15 years. I'll still be alive, I guess. So, yeah, it's depressing out there, not so much because of Russia, China, and Iran. I don't really worry much about Russia, China, and Iran. I don't think you should worry much about Russia, China, and Iran. I think you should worry about what's happening inside America. We should worry about what's happening inside Europe. I mean, we should stand up to Russia, China, and Iran. We should do all kinds of things to stand up for them, push them back, delay, weaken them to the extent that we can. And in the case of Iran, we should just destroy them. But the real challenge is, the real cause of World War III, the real cause of real disaster in the West is going to be the West. What we need is what I've always talked about we need. We need a philosophical revolution. We need a real dramatic change in the philosophy of the culture in the West, in America. And without it, again, four talks in 4 days, and you have to say that the ignorance out there, the ignorance, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that it's mostly ignorance, is astounding. The lack of understanding what America is about, what it stands for, its value, what it represents, astounding. The lack of knowledge of any history, of any understanding of history, astounding. We can't survive as a civilization with this level of ignorance and this extent of bad philosophy. So World War III is more likely to be a slow decline. Maybe then it'll be a world war. There might not even be a world war then. It'll just be a slow decline. And that's what I see in the West today, a slow, slow, slow decline. All right, on that wonderful optimistic note, there's not going to be a World War III anytime soon. That's optimistic. I'm making a prediction. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's look. All right, we've got a bunch of Super Chat questions. Thank you for the Super Chatters. You too can ask a question in Super Chat. Let me remind you, the show is sponsored by the Ayn Rand Institute. If you go to AynRand.org let me find this. Start here. You'll find a lot of information about the programs of the Ayn Rand Institute. So, as you know, Ayn Rand wrote that the Fountainhead was a guidepost for young people in a world of very few guideposts to find. She called it a confirmation of the spirit of youth. It's exactly that spirit that we need today. Ayn Rand Institute is currently experiencing a huge influx of demand from young people requesting Ayn Rand's novels. One request every 20 minutes. One request every 20 minutes. Hundreds every day. On Tuesday, November 28th, we're celebrating the success and the inspiration of Ayn Rand's novels that it gives us, as well as young people who are seeing, who we're seeing read them for the first time. We're gonna do a celebration of this. It'll be Tuesday, November 28th at 2 p.m. East Coast time. We'll be talking about the work that the Ayn Rand Institute does, the exciting progress the Institute has made. You could go to aynrand.org, start here to learn more and sign up. So don't forget to sign up for this important event that is going to happen on November 28th. You can do that now at aynrand.org/start here. All right, let us go to Super Chat. Don't forget you can support the show on Super Chat or with a sticker. We've got a lot of people watching, 170 people watching right now. We're about 200 short of our goal. So please consider supporting the show. You can also support the show monthly. YaronBrookShow.com/support, Patreon, or Subscribe Star. All right, where you can search Yaron Brook Show. Let's start with Richard. Richard said, this is $40. This makes 60 out of 100 for song review. I did the last 20 on what I thought was a live show, but it was an applause. I sent you an email with a screenshot when it happened. I appreciate that. Just send me the name of the song you want me to review. Okay, Chad. Do altruists have to value justice in order to support injustice, to make a worthy sacrifice? No, I don't think it works that way. It's not that oh God, we need an example here to think about this. So do altruists support Hamas rather than Israel as a form of injustice because they think through and they say, oh, yeah, Israel is in the right, but what I actually want to do is sacrifice, so I'm going to support Hamas. I don't think that's what happens. Altruism is internalized. It becomes, if you will, automatized. It's part of their value response. They value Hamas because they're altruists. It's not that they, and they think Hamas, the justice is on Hamas because they're oppressed, because oppression defines justice. The sacrifice is internalized. It's not them thinking, oh, I need a sacrifice today. It's not how altruism works. It conditions your thinking to make you sacrifice, to drive you towards the action that is a sacrifice, or the idea that is a sacrifice. Hopefully that's clear, Chad. Okay, Liam says, I can see how nationalism and existential crisis can bring people together to take life and values more seriously. Look at Israel. Those people love intensely. Yeah, but it'll pass, right? So it's not, crisis does not change minds. Crisis brings people together for a while. It allows them to challenge the status quo for a while, but it doesn't change anything fundamentally. And it is still the case that as soon as the crisis is over, they go back to the old habits. They go back to complacency. I don't think Israel has changed. Israel doesn't love intensely because of nationalism. I don't even think Israel loves intensely because of existential crises. Israelis love intensively because they have a good life, because they value their freedom to some extent, and because they have a set of values that dictates that they want to change the world. They want to do stuff. They are motivated. They are productive. And I think that's what leads to intense loving. It's intense living. And maybe that is intensified by an existential threat. I don't think it's intensified by nationalism. I don't think nationalistic people love more intently. They might love strangers more. That's a really risky proposition. I don't think they love, in the sense that we mean love, more intensely. James, what do you think of Mauritius, the country, does it have potential to be another Singapore? Are there any islands or places that are going to be great to have residence or a place to live in during World War III? How does Southeast Asia come into play in World War III? I don't know much about Mauritius. There's no reason to believe that it's going to become a Singapore. Singapore was Singapore because it had something very, very rare. It had a benevolent dictator who was inspired by the West. A benevolent dictator who was inspired by, British common law, by a system of freedom, of contract law. Somebody who understood that economic success comes from entrepreneurs who are left free to innovate and produce. And even there, they're not completely free in Singapore. And yet, it's also a culture that restricts freedoms in other dimensions, across many other dimensions. I don't know that you're going to find another place that's exactly Singapore. And who would be the inspiration? When Singapore came into being, there were lots of inspirations. The West generally was an inspiration. But the West since then has become such a mixed bag and unprincipled and doesn't have any self-esteem and doesn't stand up for itself. Freedom, free markets are not inspiring. So I just don't see it. Is there a place that could become the next Singapore? I mean, Singapore, World War III happens. You could go to Singapore. Would Singapore be safe? I don't know. I mean, it depends how the World War III comes about. But look, if China lands up having territorial ambitions, if China wants to dominate Southeast Asia, then why wouldn't it occupy Singapore? Why wouldn't it invade Vietnam and try to take Taiwan and that whole region? And maybe World War III happens because of a conflict between India and China. And if a conflict between India and China, that whole region is going to be affected. I don't know if you want to be in that region. So I don't know how you are saved, where you are saved in World War III. Now, again, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, so I wouldn't worry about it. But where do you go? I don't know. Maybe South America is not part of World War III. It's not clear anybody is going to be seeking. It's not close to anybody, any of the combatants, right? Russia, Europe, Middle East in flames. Who's going to go to Latin America? So maybe somewhere in South America, Uruguay. Uruguay is it's between Brazil and Argentina. It's a relatively free place, relatively good rule of law, relatively stable, relatively low crime relative to South America. Maybe Uruguay is a place you want to go. A lot of the rich of Brazil and Argentina have homes in Uruguay and plan to escape there if things get really bad. But I think if you assume China's going to be involved, I'd be wary of choosing any place in Asia. All right. Thank you, James. That was a $50 question. Really appreciate it. Okay, here's a $100 one from Not Another Account. All right. Not Another Account says, great shows. Given that the only way to finally defeat an enemy is to destroy its will to fight, it seems to me that the only way to decisively end Islamic terrorism is to demonstrate that Allah is impotent by destroying the holiest mosques in Mecca and Medina. Thoughts? I mean, I have no objection ultimately, particularly after 9/11, to destroying Mecca and Medina. But I'm not sure that would do it. I'm not sure that would be enough. Religionists have the capacity to rationalize things like that quite well. Certainly Islam has been defeated over and over and over again, and God has not stood by them. So they can rationalize it away. I don't know what kind of Mecca and Medina, attacking Mecca and Medina, what impact that would have on Islam. I'm not sure surrender is what the response would be. The basic rationalizations could be, we have not been dedicated enough to, so God is sending out a message. it could be this devil of the West is even a bigger devil than we thought. Look, the only way to defeat the enemy is to defeat the enemy. First identify it and then defeat it. What destroying Islamic terrorism requires is a multi-pronged, coordinated attack on the bastions of Islamic totalitarianism. That means the destruction of Iran, of this regime in Iran, not the country, but the regime, the elimination of its military, of its national guard, of its ability to export oil, of its institutions of governance, its institutions of government, and including its institutions of learning, where they learn this kind of interpretation of Islam. So I think it requires the taking out of Iran. Second, it requires the taking out of the various organizations that are affiliated. Now, taking out Iran will go a long way to taking these institutions out, because they'll take their one ally and their one source of capital. But that means Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, Muslim Brotherhood, and all the varieties there are, which again, I don't think would be that difficult to do once Israel, the United States together are committed to doing it. The West, NATO, are committed to doing it. Third, it requires that the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Gulf states, abandoned the radical form of Islam explicitly. Right now they pretend, well, implicitly and explicitly. Right now they pretend, but they cultivate radical Islam on the side. They're afraid to challenge it directly. Saudi Arabia has to be made to understand that to the extent that they will protect the radical Islamists, to the extent that they support them, the United States will either withdraw its support for them or just replace them, just get rid of the kings of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has no sense of how, well, it does have a sense, but we don't exploit that sense, how dependent MBS and the rest of the Saudis are on America. How much they need us, 100 times more than we need them. We need to make that very clear to them and demand that they pacify whatever elements of radical Islam they have within the regime. So I think Saudi Arabia needs to be dealt with. I don't think militarily is necessary, but it needs to be dealt with. It needs to have a solid understanding of who the boss is and who they cannot offend in terms of supporting organizations. It's still true that charities in Saudi Arabia, the Wahhabis are still popular in Saudi Arabia, are still supporting Islamist, theocratic organizations and schools and learning all over the world. And that needs to stop, and it needs to stop yesterday. That's how you defeat them. There's just no other way. I don't think a bomb on Mecca and Medina would be enough. I think you need to do that plus everything else that I said. Or if you do everything else I said, I'm not sure you need to bomb Mecca and Medina. All right, Michael says, I had a prof tell me Hitler and the Nazis were copying the American ideal manifest destiny as justification to expand their empire. When people make giant leaps in logic, they have to be dishonest and motivated by evil. That is clearly dishonest. That is so evasive of reality. It's definitely, that is evil, and it's driven by a hatred of America. To associate America in any way with the Nazis is just the peak of dishonesty. And it's a hatred of America, which a lot of people have, unfortunately, out there. Both the left and the libertarians seem to embrace that hatred of America. So no, the manifest destiny is not a manifest destiny of a race. The manifest destiny is the destiny of a country that is a country based on a moral principle, the principle of individual rights. The extent that it was used in various periods of time to justify racism. Racism is bad, but that racism never elevated itself to the level of the Nazis. And when it did, like through slavery, there was a civil war in the United States to eradicate it, and even then, the slavery was not everywhere in the United States. It didn't infect vast parts of the United States. Harper, Vivek's absolute asinine and dishonest comments in Ukraine and his constant kissing up to Trump are pathetic. He has lost my vote. I think DeSantis is the most competent and reasonable choice. I certainly agree about Vivek. I mean, Vivek is becoming nuttier as he becomes more desperate, as he drops in the polls and is becoming more desperate for attention. He is becoming nuttier. He's a guy who I don't think is stupid enough to believe in conspiracy theories, but his ridiculous comments on Ukraine and even some of his comments on Israel and his comments about building a wall on the Canadian border and going to war with Mexico are all nutty and crazy, and this guy should not be allowed anywhere near the White House. Of course, we're going to elect Trump, so we don't have standards in terms of sanity and the White House. But yes, I think Vivek is particularly bad. I think his sucking up to Trump is awful, and I think his positions in these issues. He's got a lot of good stuff, and it's sad to see the mixture of a few good things that he has to say with all this really, really bad stuff. Really, really bad stuff. Whereas with DeSantis, I don't like DeSantis. I don't think he's a good choice. I think in many respects he's terrible. But I would take him over the alternatives. Other than I still think the best candidate out there is Nikki Haley. I think she's in some polls leading DeSantis. I think she could win. I definitely think she could beat Biden. I think she'd be a decent. I think she'd be a decent president. Not a great president, but a decent president. I don't think Vivek wants to be a VP. I don't think he has any chance in hell that Trump takes Vivek as a VP candidate. I mean, Vivek is too charismatic, too energetic, too domineering for Trump to take him on. Trump needs somebody subservient. He needs somebody like Mike Pence. I mean, the only person who might have a chance is Nikki Haley. But I don't think anybody else on that stage is going to be a vice presidential candidate with Trump. J.J. Jigbee's, if the uproar driving anti-Israeli sentiment is fundamentally anti-Semitic, what is driving the pro-Israeli sentiment? The issue brings our passion in people regardless of relations one may have or not have with either side. Look, I think that the modern left, and the modern left, let's start with the modern left. I did a show on the left and anti-Semitism. I think the modern left is necessarily anti-Semitic, just because of their logic of oppressor and oppressed, and viewing everything from the perspective of oppressor and oppressed. Jews are too successful, therefore they must be the oppressor, therefore we must be anti-Jews. In that sense, they're anti-Semitic. They're anti-Jews for being Jews. So I think the modern left is indeed anti-Israel and anti-Semitic. And it doesn't mean everybody who's anti-Israel is anti-Semitic, right? But it does mean that some people are, and a significant number of people are. On the modern right, the same thing. The modern right is anti-Semitic. You can see it in their statements, in the way they articulate. And Muslims, Hamas is anti-Semitic. You see it in the fact that they don't talk about annihilating Israelis. They talk about annihilating Jews. So I'm not sure what the issue is. So to pro-Israel is to be pro-Israel. It's to be somebody, there are a lot of reasons why you would be pro-Israel. You're pro-Israel because you're pro-America and you see Israel as an ally. You're pro-Israel because you're pro-individualism and you see Israel as standing up relatively for individual freedom as compared to the barbarism of Hamas. You're pro-Israel because you see in the geopolitical scheme of things, it's good for the West if Israel wins. You're pro-Israel because Israel's fighting the same enemy as the United States is fighting. There are lots of reasons to be pro-Israel that don't have to do with pro-Jewish or anti-Jewish. But the reality is that the reasons people have for hating Israel, the oppressive, the success of Israel, the label of Israelis as oppressors, is something they can easily and do extrapolate about all Jewish people, and anti-Semitic as well. I think I understood the question. JJ, please let me know if I did not. Lyron, what inspired the positive sense of life in the 1800s? How does it differ from what influences today's negative sense of life? That's a great question. What inspired the positive sense of life in the 1800s was the Enlightenment in the 1700s. It was a philosophical revolution that elevated reason, elevated human competence, human ability. And one of the things that is common to the Enlightenment, and is a theme throughout the Enlightenment, is the possibility and the virtue of progress, of the future being better than the past, which is a new idea because there was never been progress in the past, or very little progress in the past. So the idea that progress was good and progress was achievable and progress was doable and there was no limit to it. The idea that human beings were able, competent, could understand the world and achieve great things in the world comes out of the Enlightenment. And finally, the idea that happiness is achievable, the pursuit of happiness. And arguably a unifying factor of the Enlightenment is the idea that happiness is achievable. Individuals should pursue happiness and try to achieve happiness. And that unifies at least the moral thinking of the Enlightenment. So it's an overwhelmingly positive view of the world, an overwhelmingly pro-man view of the world, an overwhelmingly pro-reason view of the world, an overwhelmingly pro-individual view of the world. And that drove this sense of life, a happy, positive, engaging sense of life. Man's competent and able to be on this earth and be successful on it. Switch to the 20th century. Certainly since World War I. Man is fallible, but worse. He's riddled with original sin, not just coming from Christianity, but from our secular philosophers. Yeah, there's a whole topic there. We'll talk about it another time. Man has fallen. So in a sense, taking Christianity more seriously. A sense that progress is not that good. Certainly we get that today. Progress has limits. Progress is bad for the environment, let's say, the whole environmentalist issue. People are going to end the world. Individualism is bad. Individualism means, isolationism, depression, detachment from the good. An embrace of collectivism, at least the beginning of the 20th century. An embrace of nihilism towards the end of the 20th century. But fundamentally, it all boils down to Kant's, the evil thing that Kant did, which is separate reason from reality. That is, if reason is impotent, there's no reason to have a positive sense of life. If reason is impotent, things are not going to go well. If reason is impotent, we can't know reality. We can't know the truth. We're dependent on mystics. We're dependent on revelation. We're dependent on religion. Life sucks. The world sucks. Yeah. So it really does boil down to a respect for reason. In the 20th century, at least qua intellectuals, we've seen a dramatic decline in respect for reason, which is filtered through the society. That has led to a deep pessimism, whether it's on the left environmentalism or on the right traditionalism. They're all fundamentally pessimistic about the future, pessimistic about the state of man, pessimistic about the ability of human beings to be successful in the future. And that is destructive for sense of life. All right, Howard, how should the U.S. and Israel deal with Qatar? I mean, the U.S. should, first of all, leave Qatar Israel should feel free to assassinate, bomb, do whatever is necessary in Qatar to destroy the people, the Hamas operatives who live in Qatar. Qatar should be told without any question that to the extent that they are funding terrorism, they are a target on a list of targets for both Israel and the United States. That is, if they send money to Hamas, they become an enemy of Israel, and Israel has the weapon systems to destroy them, and it will. It's a tiny little country with very little resources other than oil and no real military capabilities, and Israel or the United States should destroy them to the extent that they support ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Hamas or Hezbollah or any terrorist, Islamist terrorist organization that poses a threat to the United States or Israel. Thomas says, yes, we know all Thomas. I would have had many things to criticize about the U.S. in 1941, but I would have been 100% pro-American in World War II. Equally, one can have criticism of politics of Israeli government, but be 100% pro-Israel in this conflict. Absolutely, and that's me, right? I was very critical of the Netanyahu government, have been for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50. I mean, my whole life I've been critical of the Israeli government. I can't remember a time where I was happy with the Israeli government. I've always criticized them. I've always thought they were terrible. And yet, in this conflict, I'm 100% behind them. Because when you're facing with evil, you've got to side with whatever elements of good there are in the world to destroy the evil. And we're facing the kind of evil the Hamas represents is the kind of evil the Nazis represent. It's the kind of evil Stalin represented. In some ways worse, because it's backed by a religious theology that justifies everything they do, that gives them a certain, they relish blood, they relish slaughter, they relish humiliation, they relish rape and pillage. I mean, the Nazis try to hide what they did. Hamas puts it up online for all the world to see. They are proud of it. They call up their mothers and talk about how many Jews they've killed today. So there's an evil, like, it's very rare, this kind of evil to see in the world. Human beings really have to be depraved to reach this level. You've got to side with whatever elements of good there are out there, and Israel fundamentally is a good country. I'm very critical of almost every aspect of what they do, and yet they're still fundamentally good. You know, libertarians, many libertarians, can't make that distinction. The state government, qua state government, is evil. And therefore, there is no states that are better and states that are worse. They're all evil because they tax you, right? I said this and people were horrified, but then people actually wrote on Twitter exactly what I said. Yeah, states commit evil. That doesn't make them all the same. Some states are more evil than others. Some states, because a state fundamentally is a good thing, this is the difference with libertarians, in that they preserve peace. Some states, the positive they do outweigh the negatives they do. I still want to see the negatives gone, but I'd rather take a state like Israel or the United States than anarchy, any day. Any day. JJGB says, I guess my point is this. This issue gets people on both sides riled up like no other. If anti-Semitism and anti-oppression explains one side's passion, what explains the other side's passion, especially people with no skin in the game? Well, first, I don't think it riles up. I mean, we've got people on my chat complaining that we spend too much time talking about this issue, and they're not riled up. I think what gets them riled up is what I just said, the sheer evil that Hamas represents, the sheer barbarism, and the fact that that barbarism is not only relegated for Israel. People still remember 9/11. They remember the terrorist attacks in France and in London and in other places. They know what these Muslims, Islamists are capable of. So they get very riled up because they see this correctly, in my view, as an existential threat. how do you stay neutral, or how do you stay calm, or how do you stay unriled up when you see barbarians raping and torturing young women? Of course that riles you up. And it should rile you up. And it's happening to a Western country. It's happening not in conditions of barbarism, in conditions of civilization. So it's one thing to say, well, this happens every day in Africa. Yeah, Africa's a barbaric place. We expect it. We don't, it's not a direct threat on us, in a sense, because it's barbarians fighting each other in terms of barbaric civilization, cultures. But here it's within a civilized world this is happening. That, I think, outrages people. And I think it should. I think there's a difference if these things happen in the United States or in Israel or in Europe, or if they happen in, the Republic of the Congo, which is a place with no real government, a place of tribal warlords fighting each other constantly that has never really had a civilizing force. How can we tolerate this under civilization is what really riles people up. Michael says, we will be able to genetically engineer geniuses. Will we be able to produce billions of Ayn Rands? No, because it's not an issue. Ayn Rand's genius is not genetic. Ayn Rand's genius is not genetic. Nobody's genius is genetic. Genes are a component, but they're not a major component. To make an Ayn Rand, a young Ayn Rand had to make certain choices, had to create a certain spirit, had to create a certain human being that she became. That doesn't happen because of genes. Genes give you the raw horsepower. They don't give you the roadmap of how to use the horsepower, where to take it. So you'd create a lot of geniuses maybe, but you wouldn't create a lot of Ayn Rands. James says, is Tucker Carlson an anti-Semite? I don't know. I don't know. I haven't seen his commentary in Israel or on Jews or on anything else, so I don't really fully know. But I also think that Tucker Carlson doesn't really believe in anything. Tucker Carlson believes in building Tucker Carlson an audience. Tucker Carlson believes in catering to the Tucker Carlson audience. Tucker Carlson believes in being on the fringe, and because that's where you get the most passionate, dedicated audience is on the fringe, not in the center. And that's what Tucker Carlson is. He dabbles with conspiracy theories. He dabbles with all kinds of nonsense. Whether he believes any of it, I'm skeptical. I think he does it because he knows his audience. I think Tucker Carlson thinks that most Americans are dumb, really, really, really dumb, and that he can exploit that. He can make money off of it. He can achieve fame and fortune because other people are dumb. Bonnie says, did Biden force the ceasefire? Shameful. Yeah, no question. Not the first time, not the last time. I don't know if there's a ceasefire. My understanding is there's this pause, a 4-hour pause. But yeah, all of this is engineered by Biden, but with the full cooperation of people like Netanyahu, and of course the Europeans are putting a lot of pressure on, and so on. So, but yeah, it's shameful. But if you believe that Trump, Bush, Obama, Reagan would have done anything else, you're delusional. They all would have done exactly the same. Every American president, every single American president has tied the hands of Israelis and forced them to retreat and to announce ceasefires before their time, including Donald Trump. There were incursions, there were problems with Gaza during Donald Trump's presidency. It's not like he gave Israel a thumbs up, go in and do whatever you want to do. It's not what American presidents have done, any of them. Harper, it's amazing how effective altruism is at floating abstractions. It's so automatized in our impulses and emotional lurches. Absolutely. Completely automatized into the culture and therefore into us as individuals. All right, James says, intellectuals today have become masters of using the most words possible to say absolutely nothing. I don't think it's intellectuals today. I think this has a long tradition, particularly in German. Yeah, maybe it's the absolutely nothing that is more unique to today. At least in those days, in the 18th century, 19th century, they had the pretense of saying something. Now they don't have even a pretense. James says, is Germany the most intellectual culture in Europe? Ironic that German philosophy explicitly seeks to destroy the intellect. It is ironic. Is Germany the most intellectual culture in Europe? I don't know. Northern Europe is generally very intellectual. So is the UK, but I don't know. I don't have any measure of who's more intellectual than the rest and what that even means. If intellectuality boils down to postmodernist nonsense, is that really intellectualism? What do we count as intellectualism? I don't know. That's a whole topic I'm not sure about. Michael says, it's hard for me to believe all this anti-Israel activity is calculated anti-Semitism. Do most people think about Jews that much? No, it's not calculated. I mean, nothing here is calculated. And I never suggested it's calculated. I don't think people think that much about Jews. They emote about Jews. They feel it. And when you stimulate them, they blame the Jews. I mean, it's not like anti-Semitism in Europe was calculated mostly. The Nazis were calculated. But usually anti-Semitism was just a response to the other, to the idea of the other causing mayhem and causing destruction. It's embedded into American culture on the left because of what I talked about the other day, which is the left's obsession with dividing everybody up into oppressor and oppressed because of intersectionality and other things. And Jews, because they're successful, are always going to be the oppressor. And Palestinians, because they're poor, are always going to be the oppressed. And that drives a lot of this attitude towards Jews in Israel. Michael, a bit off topic, but do you regard addiction as a disease? It strikes me that low willpower, self-esteem isn't a disease. Well, it depends what we mean by addiction. I think the definition of addiction has dramatically shifted over time. If you talk about addiction as something like addiction to heroin, I don't think it's a disease, but it's clearly a biological condition that is very, very difficult to overcome and requires medical care to overcome it. It's almost impossible to go cold turkey on heroin without having really, really horrific physical side effects. What we have today is a pseudo addiction epidemic. Are people addicted to tobacco? Not really. I know so many people who just went cold turkey. Is it hard? Sure. A lot of habits are hard to give up. Is there some small biological addiction of tobacco that the body has? Sure. I crave coffee. Am I addicted to coffee? No, I could stop tomorrow if I really wanted to. And I go days without drinking coffee. And I might feel a little bad as a consequence. But does that mean I'm addicted to it? So I think there are certain drugs, there are certain chemicals that clearly are addictive and that cause a real physical response if you try to go off of them. But is chocolate addictive? Some say it is. Is pornography addictive? Is sex addictive? No, all of those things are not physiologically addictive. They're psychological habits, and it's just a matter of will, and it's just a matter of, again, anything. You put a bag of nuts in front of me, and I start eating nuts. It's hard to stop. It's hard to stop. Does that mean nuts are addictive? No, I can't stop if I deploy enough will to do it. So the fact that something is hard does not mean it's addictive. Addictive should mean some kind of biological resistance to stopping it. And a significant biological resistance, not a mild one. And look, there's probably variation across people. Some people are more addictive to stuff than others. Is alcohol addictive? Probably for some people. There's even genes associated with that. I don't find it addictive. But I don't abuse it either. Hopper Campbell says, what did you make of Vivek's sexist remarks to Nikki Haley? He's a sexist. He's trying to put her down. He's trying to do everything to put her down. And part of the tactic is to try to shake her up a little bit and try to destabilize her so she comes off, she doesn't come off as credible. He realizes who the enemy is. But yeah, it's stupid. I hate these debates. They're stupid debates. They're anti-intellectual. They play into the hands of people who throw bombs. They play into the hands of the Trumps and the Viveks of the world. instead of, you should have 5 minutes to answer questions, or at least 2-3 minutes to answer questions, not 1 minute. 1 minute answer to questions are stupid. You learn nothing from them. They're sound bites. They're well prepared. That's not interesting. The ability to deploy insults or to deflect insults, that's not what I need a president to be able to do. I need a president to be able to think. I need a president to be able to be decisive. I need a president to be able to have good ideas. Debates should be about ideas. They should be about the implication of those ideas for action. And you should be able to see and experience whether these candidates have the knowledge and the foresight and the commitment to really govern properly. All right, we have a lot of questions and I need to leave in a little while, so we're going to do these quickly. Do you consider yourself more Howard Roark than John Galt? I don't consider myself either one of those. I can't think in terms of John Galt and Howard Roark. They're both inspirations. They're both things to strive towards. I'm neither a genius in architecture or a genius in anything really, nor the perfect human being, which is John Galt. I just can't see myself in those. I'm much more sympathetic to Dagny or to Reardon than I am to Roark and John Galt, who are complete, right? Who don't change, who struggle with very little, who just know exactly what they are and what they want to be and what they want to do. Clark says, it's hard to calibrate the nihilism level in the culture and amongst intellectuals. Maybe they're not fully nihilistic enough to want to tear it all down. Yeah, they've got nihilistic elements. They're not suicidal enough to tear it all down, but they do enjoy tearing when they have a chance to do it. You saw that during BLM. You saw that in their relishing of what Hamas has done. Liam says, Obama's comments literally made me nauseous. He has no boundaries on his narcissism. Well, I mean, there are people who are more narcissistic. We've had a president who was more narcissistic than Obama by quite a long shot. Obama's problem is he's intellectually corrupt, but Obama actually has an intellect, whereas Trump is just narcissism with no intellect. Richard says, in the 1960s presidential debate, JFK and Nixon had 3 minutes to respond. Do you know what changed culturally since then? Their ideas weren't great, but they were forced to get into specifics on policies and be more thoughtful. Yeah, I mean, what changes, we become a television-addicted, soundbite-addicted culture that wants instant gratification and is much more interested with entertainment value than with ideas and with actually policy recipes. We've taken the JFK and Nixon pragmatism to a whole new level, and we're really not really interested in anything more substantive than what we can get in a minute answer that these guys give. And what we want and demand from our candidates are insults. And what get them points are the insults. I mean, Donald Trump taught us that. He called one of the debating partners ugly. He accused the other, he made accusations about family members of others. He was just a horrific, but he was entertaining. And he won the nomination. People have learned. That's what Americans want. At least that's what Republicans want. All right, Liam says, I was listening to Rashida Tlaib getting hysterical about Israeli genocide and ethnic cleansing. I am surprised she didn't scream Allah Akbar and detonate. Yeah, I don't think she's quite suicidal, but she's definitely hateful. She's definitely hateful and irrational and emotionalist, no question. Ed, what would the response be if Israel decided at some point to destroy Iran's oil fields, especially the U.S. response? Oh, the U.S. would be horrified. The U.S. would slam sanctions on Israel. They would stop supplying them with weapons. The United States would go apoplectic. Apoplectic. I mean, price of oil would go up. Many Americans would turn against Israel. I think Israel should do it, but let's not be naive about how America will respond. America hates that idea and doesn't want a war with Iran and doesn't want to instigate anything. And wants to keep the oil flowing. That's the most important thing, is the oil keeps flowing. James says, we're living in times when the bullies are winning. Because the good people are submitting. And they have to submit because they don't have Ayn Rand. Well, yes, but they have to submit because they don't have principles. They have to submit because they don't have, any kind of principles. It doesn't have to be, any kind of pro-life principles. Like, Ayn Rand is the end result, but, the West didn't submit, America didn't submit to the Nazis or to the Japanese. America fought them and destroyed them. There were values in America that prevented America from submitting without Ayn Rand. And they can be resurrected without Ayn Rand, but some values need to be. What we have today is a complete void of values, not just Ayn Rand. Richard said, I just finished Arthur Herman's biography of Douglas MacArthur, very much worthwhile reading. Perhaps one of my favorites this year. The decisiveness of his confidence he exuded seems very foreign compared to modern leaders. Yes, I mean, that's true of Douglas MacArthur, it's true of Patton, it's true of many of the leaders. Unfortunately, the guy who got the most credit for World War II and ultimately benefited by becoming president is Eisenhower, who was the wimp of World War II, who is exactly the opposite of Douglas MacArthur and Patton. But he got rewarded for his wishy-washiness by becoming president of the United States. Richard Cummings, can you think of a better example of pseudo-self-esteem than Donald Trump? No, I actually can't. And I've said this all the time. Donald Trump does not have self-esteem. That fake confidence, that insulting everybody, that inability to take a blow are the signs of a pseudo-self-esteem, which is exactly Trump. All right, God, we still have quite a few questions. Okay. Too bad all the energy put towards, this is proper, towards supporting the Palestinians isn't being put towards supporting the Iranian people. No kidding, those Iranian girls could could benefit from the support. You'd think the feminists would be all over that. No, they'd much rather attack Israel. Black Cat 997, the United States and Eurozone and developed Asia dwarf China and Russia with regard to economics, level of technology, yes, and as a consequent level of the military. People underestimate us and don't understand how large the mismatch it really is. Absolutely, I agree with you completely, Black Cat 997. Matthew, given the reporting of back and forth strikes between US and Iran, or Iranian proxies, would you say that we are effectively at war with Iran without either side wanting to outright declare it? Yes, but I think we've been at war with Iran since 1979. And we're too cowardly to acknowledge it and to declare it. But yeah, no question. And the United States keeps this back and forth without doing anything substantive and without dealing with the Iranians directly. But that's been going on since 1979. Michael says, does a humanitarian pause mean that the hostages get to come home for the weekend asking for 240 friends? What do you think? Of course not. All pauses, all ceasefires are one-sided. They only involve Israel. Because Israel is strong, and therefore it needs to be reined in. Hamas is weak, therefore it should be allowed to do whatever it wants. James says, do you still recommend London as a place to live based on how things have changed in the last 3 years? Is there any hope for the UK to rebound? I don't know. I mean, the UK is in bad shape for a lot of reasons. Economically, it's a disaster. The Conservative Party has completely abrogated all its responsibilities and anything good it had. The police, there's a whole, I'll talk about this in a show in a couple of days. The police in London won't rein in the Islamic demonstrators. They're too cowardly, they're too afraid. Basically, the police in the UK have taken the stand that they're pro-Islam, they're pro the Muslims and against any Brit that stands up to them. UK is deteriorating fast in front of our eyes. I still love London. It's still one of my favorite cities in the world. I love being there. But the UK as a place to live is becoming more and more difficult and more challenging because of the Conservative Party's failure, just disastrous policies, and because of what they're letting Muslims get away with in London. I'm not afraid of Muslims. I'm afraid of Muslims uncontrolled. by police. I'm afraid of the lack of the rule of law, which is what UK is moving towards. Asterisk says, keep up the good work, Yaron. Thank you. JJ Jigby says that answered it. Thank you. Thanks, JJ Jigby. Okay, Frank gets the last word, I think. I asked an anti-capitalist to watch Shark Tank and the food that built America. He did. He was unimpressed and viewed entrepreneurs as exploiters. Why? Well, because Shark Tank, and I don't know what the food that built America is, these are not serious attempts to present the value of entrepreneurship or the value of businessmen. I mean, you got to do better than Shark Tank. Shark Tank is a joke. Most of those businesses don't survive anyway, and they certainly don't thrive. You've got to go to the heart of you've got to provide history. You've got to provide context. You've got to show the difference between life under non-capitalism and life under a little bit of capitalism, the difference between the two. And it's massive. So Shark Tank is not a good example of anything positive. It's entertainment. It's not business. It's entertainment. It's a name that disguised as business. Capitalism isn't about Shark Tank. Capitalism is about freedom, about liberty. It's about the use of the human reason. Capitalism is about reason and individual rights. And that results in entrepreneurship. But entrepreneurs, I mean, if you don't have any respect for reason, then you don't have any respect for entrepreneurs. If you don't have any respect for the trader principle, the trade, what trade means, if you think the world is a zero-sum game somehow, you don't have any respect for entrepreneurs. They're just exploiters. If you think all labor is physical labor, you're not going to have, and Shark Tank's not going to teach you the value of entrepreneurship. It might motivate some yahoos to go and start a business because they see pretty mediocre businesses being started on Shark Tank. But I don't know of any significant business that was started on Shark Tank. Sorry. Silicon Valley, you want to do a reality show in Silicon Valley? Yeah, that would be cool. All right. Sure, it can be inspirational for people who already are inspired by entrepreneurs. It's not going to create the inspiration. And by the way, if you look at the companies that Shark Tank have funded, they don't do that well. They're not that successful. All right. We're $24 short of our goal. We've got 197 people watching right now live. There's a lot of people watching live right now that are not supporting the show. Please do so with a sticker or with a contribution through Patreon or on PayPal. But please support the show. I'd really appreciate that. Value for value. I produce something. You consume it. Pay for it. Makes sense. Also, 197 people watching right now. Please please subscribe. If you're not a subscriber already, please subscribe. I hear that at 100,000 subscribers, the algorithm really boosts your content. So we've only got 65,000 to go. So please subscribe to the channel so we can get a little closer to the 100,000 today. All right, Frank asked truly the final question. If you want to support the show, do it with a sticker, not with a question, because I do have to go. He says, dark days. Jews are highly rationalistic in contrast to Islam, which is dualistic, us versus them, and power-oriented as an absurd mockery of monotheistic religion. Islam bedfellows with modern ideology. No, I mean, Islam has a lot more in common with Christianity than it does with modern left ideology. Islam is a universalist religion. It wants everybody to become Muslim, just like Christianity wanted everybody to become Christian. Islam is a religion. It is based on faith, just like other faith-oriented. I don't think Islam is similar in any respects to the left. The left supports Islam not because it's similar, but because the left supports anything that's anti-Western civilization. And it embraces Islam, Islamists in particular, because they're anti-Western civilization. And Islam is a particularly bad religion because it never went through an enlightenment. It never went through a renaissance. It never was secularized. Christianity and Judaism are awful religions, but they were secularized. Secularized. In the, Renaissance and the Enlightenment. All right, thank you, Frank. Thank you to all the super chatters. Thank you to all the people who did stickers whose names I didn't catch. Really, really appreciate the support. We made our target. And thank you to all the people watching. Again, don't forget to like the show before you leave. Just click that like button. Helps with the algorithms a lot. Oh, Abazi just did the first super chat he's ever done, super chat contribution. Thank you, Abazi. Please like the show, and please subscribe if you're not a subscriber. You'll be notified when I go live. You can always unsubscribe if you land up hating it. You know, the more subscribers I have, it helps with the algorithm as well. Likes, subscriptions, comments, all of that stuff is very, very helpful. All right, I need to run. I'm meeting with some people for dinner. I will see you all. Next show will be on Sunday evening at 8 p.m. 8 p.m. Puerto Rican time, which is 7 p.m. East Coast time. See you all then. Bye, everybody, and thank you